Good afternoon, and welcome to the EBU All Things Being Equal webinar. We apologize. We are unfortunately experiencing some serious internet breakdown in Switzerland at the worst possible moment, but we're working really hard to fix it and to bring everything together. My name is Claudia Vaccarone. I manage diversity programs for members at EBU, and I will moderate this webinar today. For those of you who are not familiar with EBU, the European Broadcasting Union is the largest alliance of public service media, counting 160 members organizations in 56 countries. So thank you for joining us today. We are excited to welcome over 250 participants, particularly the growing community of public service media professionals and experts in gender equality and diversity. We're honored to have with us also the Director General of Icelandic broadcaster RÚV, Stefan Eriksson, and the Director General from the Lithuanian broadcaster, Monika Garbačiauskaitė. We also have a wide spectrum of organizations and representatives from key European institutions like the Council of Europe, the European Commission, private sectors, and many NGOs. Welcome to all of you. We're all coming together today with the motivation to drive gender parity forward in our organizations and in media. Why? Because media can shape mentalities and can be a force for good in the need to accelerate society's gender norms. But media is also still heavily skewed. All recent studies from several countries point to women being seen and heard only 30% of the time on average. And there's a statistic from Women in Global Health that claims that during the COVID crisis, for every 3 men quoted in media coverage, only 1 woman has been quoted as of February 2020. And although in public service media, we have the highest number of female leaders, 27% of the EBU members director generals are women, we're still not experiencing real parity. So it has become an essential priority to include and represent women equally in every sphere of media, from an organizational standpoint first, so they can be better represented on screen and on air. And today we will discuss how we do this. We hope that today's lineup will leave you inspired and equipped with new knowledge. We will hear from the leaders as well as the professionals who are operationally changing the media landscape, bringing in more women and diversity of thought with their everyday work. We can all advance faster and more efficiently by sharing our respective experiences and supporting each other. We have a full agenda with 14 top-notch speakers from 7 different countries. For those of you active on social media, please feel free to tweet from this session and use the hashtag PSM4Equality. We will introduce each speaker also with a slide and their Twitter handle. So let me just tell you briefly about the genesis of this webinar. In 2019, at the request of its president, Tony Hall, the EBU established a steering group to research among its members the best practices in place and the actionable strategies to achieve gender parity from an organizational standpoint. In fact, some of our members already have reached parity, and some they even have actually more women than men in management roles. And this is not the first time that the EBU has worked on gender equality. Many toolkits, conferences, and reports have been published in the last decade, and I would like to salute and recognize the colleagues who have paved the way. But the data shows that there's no real progress in women representation. And at the same time, we also know and we feel that there's a political momentum for gender equality in media and in society. In the last few years, it's become an increasingly stated priority of many political strategies, like for the G7, for the European Commission, and we see more and more leaders following through. The steering group aimed to contribute guidelines to speed up the change that we hope will help all of the membership starting or moving forward their gender equality plans pragmatically, regardless of the different starting points and societal context. The members of the group worked really, really hard and in a short time, and I would like to thank them for their commitment and their hard work. The guidelines were captured in the All Things Being Equal report that we published in December last year. The report addresses 2 key organizational areas which are fundamental to achieve parity: policies and culture. This webinar is the first of a two-part series. Today's webinar will focus on the policies, and then we will address the second part on organizational cultural aspects on September 17th, so please mark your agendas. In the meantime, we also have been all confronted with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disrupted all of media's operations and strategic plans. So we will also discuss how COVID-19 factors in the pursuit of gender equality. So I'd like to bring in Tinatin Berzenishvili now, Deputy Director General of Georgian Public Broadcaster and the tireless chair of the EBU Gender Equality and Diversity Steering Group. Tinatin is an amazing role model of a modern, digital, and inclusive kind of leadership. She launched last week the Georgian version of the guidelines via a tremendous campaign, and there is not one week when she's not actively working for gender equality. So Tinatin, thank you for your leadership and welcome to the webinar. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very glad that the initiative presented and fortunately implemented by Tony Hall more than a year ago set the agenda for today. It's almost 1 year that the Gender Equality Steering Group was formed, and it has been working really hard. And I'm proud that this group has turned into a community already, and the level of competence and mutual support is truly exciting. Leading the Gender Equality Steering Group has been a privilege, and let me share with you 3 ways this experience has allowed my organization to benefit from the shared practices that lead to the starting and real movement of gender equality. First, at GPB, we are already translated the All Things Being Equal in Georgian language for the benefit of the whole organization. Second, we are developing and testing a new program measurement software, which includes an on-screen gender balance measurement tool to provide clear and transparent reports to management and, of course, to our audience and society. As never before, topic of gender equality is covered in our programs, dramas, documentaries, and of course, co-productions. And third, by the end of this year, we are going to hold a workshop on building inclusive cultures and training to prevent online harassment for female journalists. We will also develop a campaign to raise awareness of gender equality, engaging and featuring male and female colleagues with a double aim to inform the public and to prevent gender-based discrimination in the organization. So Claudia Vaccarone will speak more about the report later. And now let's move on the main and I believe more interesting part of the session. I am a big believer of personal stories, and I'd like to share mine. When I first started working, there were lots of scary stories about female executives who ignored their kids or were not home enough. It took a long time to see things differently and to show a different and positive perspectives to others. To be honest with you, I sometimes feel like I have lost a lot of time as a woman. I struggled a lot, and even now, I don't have a feeling there is a white flag. However, only just recently, I convinced myself that it is the end of the beginning, and I don't have to apologize for being a woman. So today, I want to start this session and conversation with some personal perspectives. We are honored to have with us 2 senior leaders of the public media community who have been driving the gender equality agenda both in their respective organizations as well as for the industry and among the EBU community. Sila Benko, Director General of Swedish Radio and EBU board member, Tony Hall, Director General of BBC and EBU President. Good afternoon and thank you for being with us. I would like to start by asking you, I do hope you hear me well. So the first question is, what has been your personal motivation as leaders to champion and lead gender equality? What is your personal story behind your commitment? Sila, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you very much. Fun to be with you, even though it's not in present, but let's try to make it a fun digital event anyway. Well, the easy answer actually to my personal motivation is that things get better. That's a very, very easy answer to everything. I mean, if you truly believe that you will get a good and great audience, if people feel that they get a personal value out of your programs, out of your offering, of course, more people will get a more personal value out of what you offer them if you have a greater variety in what you offer and more perspectives. And you get that if you have a more diverse workforce and more diverse output. So in that sense, the output gets better. The workflow actually gets better because in an equal working environment, people tend to behave differently. And finally, it's more fun. I couldn't even imagine being in a room with only women. Or if I would be a man, I think it would be extremely boring to be in a meeting with only men. Not as much fun to look at, anyway. And not so many good brains around. No, basically, everything gets better. And my personal experience is coming from many years back. I was 21 when I started this profession, and I started as a trainee in the sports department of the Swedish radio. And I was very young, and it was very male dominated. We're talking about the mid 80s, believe it or not. I think we were at the most 3 or 4 female sports reporters in the entire country of Sweden. And then we're talking about all media combined, press, radio, television. And so it was a struggling world, but it was also a fun way of learning how to do live radio. And obviously I survived, otherwise I wouldn't be Director General today. It was also a good way of learning how to make yourself heard, how to make yourself important, how to get your voice through in an environment where females were very few. I also tend to say that I'm happy that we didn't have social media then, because most of the comments I got from, and that wasn't from my colleagues actually, it was mostly from the audience, was not about my reporting, because my reporting was fine. Most of the comments came from men who didn't want to hear a female presenter presenting sports. And at that time, if you wanted to really bash me and you wanted 5,000 people to agree, you needed to go out and knock on doors and get people to sign the petition. Today, it's much easier. Today, you can use social media and you get 5,000 people in a crowdsource trying to bash someone quite easily. So I think it's harder today. On the other hand, the sports departments today are much more equal. So in that sense, it's easier. So that is basically my own experience of coming in as a very young woman into a very male-dominated world.
Yeah, you know, it's a little bit difficult to imagine that it was happening in Sweden, but it's much more easier now, I believe, than in my country. So
yeah, but
really,
you have to remember we're talking about the mid 80s, Tinte.
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
long
I can
time
imagine.
ago. I'm old.
Yeah, yeah, no, I don't believe. I know your age. So, and what about Tony? He's with us, and the same question. I mean, the personal story. What is behind this commitment?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations to you and also to Claudia for that brilliant report that I think Claudia was showing us all earlier on. I think that's such an important breakthrough for the EBU. For me, it goes back to I suppose my childhood. I mean, I'm a profound believer in opportunity for people, and I think social diversity as well as other forms of diversity is really important. I was very lucky because the government at that point ran schemes which meant I went to a decent school. Otherwise, my parents couldn't afford to send me there, and I went to university, and my parents couldn't afford to send me there either. So I benefited from sort of opportunity being given to me in a kind of fundamental way. You know, I'm the first of my family to go to university. So all of those things I think are really, really important. In a way, I was always constantly moving schools and always feeling like an outsider. So to me, diversity of thought, getting together, as Scilla was saying, people from all sorts of different backgrounds, by gender, by sexuality, by race, diversity. All these things are to me really, really important. And then I joined the BBC, and this was even longer ago than you two have just been talking about. And my first experience then was in the newsroom, where the only women in the newsroom were 4 typists, formidable women over in the corner who typed all your reports for the radio news, and that was just crazy. And I think as a program maker, getting in as many different people from as many different backgrounds is just fundamental to making great and good quality programs. It's as fundamental as that. And you know, to my mind, diversity of thinking means diversity of people from different backgrounds, and of course that means at least gender equality. And you know, we're making great progress. Rather like Scylla, going into a meeting which is wholly men is ghastly, and there are still one or two parts of society where you know, that's still the case, and it feels kind of weird and kind of dull and just plain wrong. So to my mind, it's diversity of thinking and diversity of opportunity is so important.
Absolutely. Diversity brings creativity. It's always the truth, and it's so true. And Tony, the BBC is one of the largest public service media organizations, and you have been personally driving its progress toward gender parity. What kind of resources have you put in place to drive gender equality in your organization?
Well, it's been quite controversial, as people might know, but we've been reforming. I mean, first of all, you need to know who's paid what, and you need to have an agreement about your terms and conditions on which you're employing people, so you can say that person is paid fairly or equally versus that person. And that reform, which hasn't been done for a generation, 25, 30 years, has been an enormous part of what we've done. And then data. Just have a look at who's employed where, especially front of camera or front of microphone. And we've used data to kind of shift the balance between men and women. So actually, when I first came back to the BBC, which is now 7 years ago, I said I wanted to do two things. One is we have a very important radio program in the morning called Today. And there was only one woman, as I recall, on that program. And I said, look, I want to get 2 women on that program. You know, it's crazy only to have 4 women, the rest being men. Well, and I came into a discussion going on where people said, well, we've been talking about it, but we're not sure how to do it. And, I just cut through all the rubbish, just do it. And within 3 or 4 months, we've done it. And I also said in our local radio stations, where the proportion was of the breakfast shows was 13% women, the rest men. I said, I want to get to half and half. Within 2 years, and again we did it. And I think targets absolutely kind of matter. Targets and data and constant monitoring. And then I think some things which are iconic. I mean, we set up a system. Actually, it was one of our presenters had this idea of 50-50, which is, why can't we on our programs have 50% women, 50% male, and just all you have to do is just tick, and it's either woman, female, male on each of these programs, and let's shift the agenda of people who we're interviewing and are talking on our programs. And that's just taken off. I mean, we've just been celebrating the fact it's now in God knows how many countries around the world. All programs are using it. It's very, very simple, but it's made a palpable difference. So I think data is really important. I think something iconic and simple that people can get their heads around to make a difference is really, really important. And then I'd say the final thing is, we've just employed someone who I think is listening in today, and I very much hope so, June Sarpong, who I brought in to take a lead on creative diversity. So not just gender diversity, but right across the piece, all diversity, including, and I go back to this, social diversity, because I think that's really important. She along with an excellent colleague you're going to hear from shortly, has made an enormous difference, both within and without the organization, to the way that diversity, gender balance, but beyond that, diversity more broadly is seen. And I think that kind of, again, leadership, obviously from me, but by, at least in this case, 2 people who are really driving this hard, is very, very important. You've got to lead it from the top, and you've got to have people around you who are doing it. But can I just say one thing? It's fantastic where I think the progress that you're making and leading on gender diversity and gender balance is really important. I do think the gender needs to get even bigger, and think particularly about social diversity. Those voices that are not being heard, those people who are not all coming into our organizations, whose voices also need to be heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And the project 50-50 is really fantastic. We have downloaded all the files and are going to implement in Georgia, starting with radio, actually. Yeah. So if your audience is interested to join up, we will make sure you have all details about this project. And now, Scylla, Swedish radio has been recognized in 2019 as the most gender equal company in Sweden, celebrating a long commitment. What have been the tangible businesses and organizational benefits you have witnessed from implementing gender equality programs?
Well, as you say, it's been a long commitment, much before me. A lot of other director generals have also pushed this for years at the Swedish Radio, and like Tony's saying, we are now more into diversity overall, and I also think social diversity is becoming more and more important also at the Swedish Radio. I mean, because we have, as you say, a very fine gender balance. But what we see is, of course, I mean, it's good for the brand, to be obvious. I mean, we are perceived to be the most trusted media company in Sweden. And you can't be the most trusted media company, almost the most trusted company overall in Sweden, if you don't have a diverse output. I mean, once again, if people don't recognize themselves in your programming, they're not going to trust you because they are going to feel that this is not for us. And to be able to have all these perspectives into your programming, you also need to have a workforce. So your staff needs to be diverse, because then you will have more of ideas and more of interesting stories are going to be told. So it's good for our brand, and good for our ratings. I mean, we have very high ratings. A lot of people listen in to Swedish Radio every day. 7.2 million people out of 10 follow us every week. So, I mean, we have great figures. And when it comes to being an employer, I think it's really, really good for our employer branding as well. And my colleague Anne will talk about that later on, I think, in another panel. I mean, we have equal pay. We have equal possibilities for career steps, for career moves. We have equal paternity leave. As many men as women are staying home taking care of their children, for instance, and that's quite natural at the Swedish Radio. So, of course, this attracts people. It attracts young men, but it also attracts a lot of young female, where you can see, as you were saying in the beginning, that it's no problem really to have a career within Swedish Radio, and quite a good career, and also be a good father or a good mother, and have time for social life and family life on the side. So, of course, this is good for both our brand, towards the public, towards the audience, and as an employer.
Yeah, absolutely. This correlation and brand and trust, I totally agree. And you have to know that you are also the role model for Georgian radio, because we are talking so much about Swedish radio.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah, it's always working, role modeling. And Tony, in times of financial constraint that public service media is subject to, now it's really very active. How do you make sure diversity, gender equality do not drop in its importance and are cast aside?
I mean, that's such a good question, because in terms of crisis, people can say, do you know what? We've got to tackle this crisis. Let's just put other things on hold. You absolutely can't do that. You mustn't do that. And I think that comes back to leadership. It comes back to data. It comes back to constantly talking about it. And you'll hear from Marianne and Anne later on, I'm sure, about what we've been doing to make sure that this doesn't get forgotten or left off the agenda. But also, I think what Scylla's saying is right, which is actually what's happening with the COVID crisis is actually an acceleration of trends that were happening anyway. So I think this is an accelerator, as opposed to something which will slow up the achievements we want to make in terms of the diversity. If we want to survive, if we want to, as public service broadcasters, represent the communities that we're serving, the people that we're serving, then diversity now is even more important. A diversity of opinion, diversity of view, diversity is even more important than it was before the crisis, in my view. And I think as long as all of us are agreeing, almost this afternoon, that we're going to keep this on the agenda, we'll win through. And actually, I always think, a crisis is the time to accelerate things, not to put them on the back foot and the back pedal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, it's this passionate toward the diversity in this time is really, really crucial, because we have also this fight. People are fighting that, it will be kind of cast aside and maybe it will not so important. So we are trying to ensure everybody that it is the top,
And it's our strength, isn't it? It's our strength. It's one of the things that we should all stand for as public service broadcasters.
I think so. Totally agree. Scylla, when listening to the BBC, one can be intimidated because not all public service media dispose of the same value in terms of workforce, talent, etc. What is your advice for smaller organizations? How can they embrace these strategies and start to make a difference?
Well, I think my best advice is most likely not to make it too complicated. because we tend to want to do too much too fast and at the same time. And I think it's not about if you need a diverse workforce or gender balance, it's how you want to achieve it. And then you have to look at basically what do you have today already and what you don't have. And for me, diversity is looking at each group per se and say, okay, this group consists of too many of that and too little of this. And it could be sometimes gender, it could be sometimes age, it can sometimes be social background, it could sometimes be ethnical background or whatever. And that makes diversity. As long as you look at every time you are going to replace someone in a group, do I have enough of this? Do I need something else? You will get to a diverse working force eventually, and therefore also a diverse output. So don't make it too complicated. Look at what you have, look at what you don't have, make some targets, as Tony's saying, put some goals in front of you. What do you want to achieve? And what do you need to do to achieve it? And always look at the two things together. The perspectives that you have within your workforce, in the group, and the perspectives you want to achieve when it comes to the output, because they are matching each other. And then you have to engage your coworkers. Nobody can do this on their own. And I think any organization that thinks that they appoint a diversity officer or a gender equality officer and then they're fine, they have a problem. Because if it's not really in your DNA, if it's not really something your organization believes is important, you will not get there. And you do need broad support. You also need broad support from top management. I've said that before. I mean, you can't fight your DG. You have to convince your DG that this is good for business. And once again, it's good for your brand and it's good for your employer branding. So that shouldn't be too hard if he or she is smart enough. And don't give up. In a small organization, I mean, you don't have as many resources maybe as you would like to have. And you will make one step forward and then it will be 2 steps backwards. And then it will be 1 step forward again, then 2 steps backwards again. But eventually you will get there. If you don't give up, if you have a broad support within your organization, and if you look at what is working and really try to explore things. Why is this working? And how can we learn from each other? How can we have maybe sort of a digital workspace where we share good experiences? It doesn't have to be so complicated, but you really need to set some targets and you have to make someone responsible for each goal. Yeah. Because even if you're a lot of people trying to do this together, I think it's always important that, say, if it is production, then maybe head of production needs to be responsible for that. If it is about gender equality within the workforce, that's maybe something HR need to be responsible for, so that you, on an annual basis at least, could do your follow-ups and see how are we doing. I mean, we created something that is not so difficult. We created small listening teams of professionals within the organization that listen to all the programming from a channel over a complete week, and then they tick off what do they actually hear. And then gender equality is one thing, diversity overall is another thing, but then it's also audio quality or indoor, outdoor recording, all kinds of things that we want to measure. And then you get hard facts. And out of hard facts, you can have a discussion, okay, what do we need to improve? So it doesn't really need to be so complicated. Just decide on what you want to do first and then tick it off one by one, and don't get discouraged if it doesn't work completely the way you want to from day one, because it's not going to do.
What I learned, and you are talking about this passion and desire is really true, very important, and make it easy. It's really good advice for small organizations who are now listening to us. I know that a lot of people are registered from the small members. We have touched this theme, but still, what will you maintain from the unprecedented crisis in the aftermath? How will you harness some of the great lessons learned that can truly matter gender equality, like work from home policy, etc.?
Well, for us, I mean, I don't think this crisis has, in that sense, made so much difference, since we are, as I said before, we are really on top of this already. But of course, even us, or even we, have had a really good. I mean, as late as today, actually, we had all management, 120 people, tuning into the same Skype meeting, discussing what are the good things that we want to keep also in the future once we're back doing our normal work. And of course, I mean, meeting procedures will be one thing. I mean, what you do to Skype and what you do in real life. I would have preferred this meeting to be in real life, but it works quite well also this way. So, I mean, this is obviously something that needs to be discussed, because if you don't have to commute all the time to all the meetings, you will have more time to do something else. Maybe go and get your kids, or cook your dinner, or just play, or go out for a jogging, or whatever you need to do. So, of course, your daily life will be easier to manage if you don't spend as much time on the road. And also, of course, working from home. Even though I think in our company it's not that easy, because we have some people that basically work from 9 to 5. I mean, for them it's quite easy to do a lot of what they do from home, and then once again they can get their life together much easier. But we have a lot of people that really need to turn up in the office, because otherwise we won't have any programming. I mean, the anchor of our morning show will most likely still be in the studio, even though we sometimes have them remote now. And I don't want it to be too unfair. I mean, because at least in Sweden, the system is if you're ill or if your child is ill, they will deduct some of your salary if you can't go to the office. And if you say then, well, for some people it's okay to work from home and they will keep their salary, and for others it's not okay, then you will have an internal problem and an internal discussion. But of course, I think we will try to do more things remotely. And maybe, I mean, an easy thing is the reporters don't have to go into the head office when they start the day. They will start their day from their home, and then they will be much closer to those we want to cover much faster. So, I mean, of course, we learned some really good things from this.
Yeah, with radio, it's a little bit easier, I guess. But still, this digital transformation is becoming real in our countries, which are not so digital at the moment.
And we are fortunate because Sweden is a very digital country to begin with very, very good connections. And also Swedish radio has been, in that sense, also early adopters of new technology. And we have developed some tools that we are using now for recording and for broadcasting that we just didn't have 2 years ago. And that has been extremely crucial for us to be able to do almost all the things we want to do without even going into the office, and the audience can't hear any difference. So, of course, that makes us think, okay, why do we start our days the way we do? Maybe we can start our days in a different way in the future.
Yeah, and Tony, what about BBC?
So for us, I mean, it's a revolution, because now 92% of our people are working from home, in television, in radio, and online, doing the jobs they would have done in the office, but from home. So this is an enormous change. And I have to say, I don't know how it is in your various countries, but the notion that public service media is somehow slow and can't adapt to change is so much rubbish. And I think people have done utterly brilliantly in all this change. We've discovered the importance of communications. Roughly 2/3 of the population of the BBC come and listen in to a call that myself and colleagues do every week, telling them what's going on. I think we're being more open and transparent about where we are than we've ever been. But I think the big thing is we've done a survey of all staff to say, how are you finding working from home? Because we know that with a 2-meter distance rules between people, we're not going to be able to have people back working in the way they were 2 months ago or 10 weeks ago for a long time, maybe 18 months or 2 years. So we've got to plan through the kind of the new workforce. And in our survey, we had so many people wrote back with, we had so many ideas coming back on this. People really wanted to be involved in this, changing the workplace, which is actually really, really good. And I think the vast majority of people are really happy working from home. They need a bit of this equipment or a bit of that, or communications need to be better. There is a minority, probably about 10%, who are finding it really, really tough, and balancing work with their life, with kids, whatever it happens to be, or they're on their own, and kind of loneliness has been really important. So I think we're going to have to show an enormous amount of sensitivity and care in taking forward the lessons of what we've learned, the simplicity of the way we now work into the future. It's going to be really interesting, really challenging, but I think quite exciting. We won't go back to the way we were.
Yeah, we are a little bit more prepared in my country, but we have different challenges also, connecting with starting with the internet, I guess, for instance. And we did our best, and now well prepared. And as you mentioned, we learned a lot, and we are now beginning to transform really in this digital era. So it was a good lesson in a good way. So, yeah, Tony, when you came in as EBU president, you called for a collective public service media effort toward gender equality. How can the EBU community to play a role in supporting its members, shaping a more gender equality society?
Well, it starts right from the top. I mean, the reason I felt we should put this absolutely out there on the agenda is because it matters. It matters in terms of fairness. It matters in terms of equality. It matters also, as I think Sarah and myself have both been saying, and you've been saying, it matters because we get better programs by putting gender equality up there as something really important. It also very specifically came from the fact that as we looked at the EBU executive board, not enough women. I mean, Scilla does an amazing job. Delphine from France does an amazing job, but not enough women on the executive board. And I think that's one of the tasks that I think, should be a legacy of all the work you're doing, that we need to see gender equality on the executive board of the EBU. And in that way, we'll embed this right across the organization. But can I just say, I think having webinars rather, like today, I think the work that you've been leading with Claudia is absolutely first rate. And I think just keeping up this exchange of information, how to do it if you're a big organization or a small organization, all of this, and then and also the kind of sense of, we're in this together. We want to make change together. What can we learn from each other? How can we give solidarity to each other? Is so important. So I'm so pleased with what you've been doing, and I hope you are too.
Yeah, it was my remark when I saw Scilla alone in this executive board, but she's doing great.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
Thank you, Tony and Scilla, for this insightful exchange. We have some questions from the audience. It will be a lot, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going back to Claudia for the Q&A session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tintin, for your wonderful introduction and moderation, and Scilla and Tony for this very insightful exchange. So we will take now some questions from the audience. So I encouraged, all our attendees to use the Q&A box. There's already a few questions, but keep them coming. So there's a question for Tony from Ana Paula Cruz, who says, how can you provide further insights into what is doing to enhance social diversity, specifically at the BBC?
Yeah, I'd be really pleased to. So we started off when I came to the BBC with, I think, about 20 or 30 apprentices. And since then, what I then said was, okay, by 2017, so this is over a 3 to 4 year period, I want to get to 1% of our workforce being apprentices. Now, why does that matter? Because apprentices can attract people from very different backgrounds. Some of the apprenticeships are from communities who otherwise wouldn't come into work in media. And also there's a kind of a bias, I think, of if you know somebody in media and you live in London, the big city, you're more, and your parents have got enough money to keep you on work experience and all of this, you're more likely to get into media. So we had apprentices working in our local radio stations up and down the country. You didn't have to move from your home. You just went into your local radio station, all these things. We actually managed to get to 1% of our workforce being apprentices within, I think, about a year and a half. And we're now at just over 2% apprentices. And I think, again, it goes back to proper schemes, data, and a commitment to following it through. And I think we've also measure the social diversity of our entire workforce. And we look at backgrounds, parental backgrounds, etc. And I think keeping that eye on social diversity is important. I hope that's useful.
Thank you very much, Tony. Very wonderful reply. There's another question that I would like to channel to Scilla from Pamela Morinier. I apologize. Unfortunately, we don't see your organizations from the Q&A box. I only see the name of the people that asked the questions. So COVID-19 has exacerbated gender inequalities, and this also applies to the newsrooms. What has been your response to this? Scilla, would you like to take this?
I don't really get the question, to be honest.
That COVID-19 has highlighted gender inequalities. So there's been a lot of talk about the fact that, women are the ones that are mostly impacted, whether it's because they're the ones at home having to deal suddenly also with the
Well,
children schooling and
for me, this is a really interesting question because it shows the differences in different countries. In Sweden, this is not an issue. I mean, in Sweden, the women are working, and they are working as much as the men. And if they're staying home, yes, maybe depends on where they're working. And there are men staying home, yes, maybe. Do the men cook already before this? Yes, they do. As I said, we have paternity leave. So, I mean, most of the men take half of the paternity leave. And in Sweden, you can stretch that to 1.5 years. So, and they're out there with the trams and their babies. So, I mean, it's not that COVID-19 has sort of changed that gender balance in Sweden in any way. And actually, those who are suffering most in Sweden are men between 60 and 70 because they get ill. And the women don't get ill as much. So those that we have, unfortunately, in our hospitals and are also dying are mostly men that has a little bit overweight or have been heavy smokers and things like that. So we don't have any discussions about sort of female problems, except for, of course, if you already have a problem at home with, a man bashing up his girlfriend or his wife, it's easier to do that now if everybody is at home. So I mean, of course, there is some of that, but there's not a discussion about that all of a sudden the men are home and the women have to care for them and also do their job, because I mean that's not the situation mainly that we have in Sweden.
I guess the question was trying to zoom in into what has been the effect of that onto the newsroom. But I guess we've also seen, and especially in public service media, that newsrooms have proven extremely agile. We've seen reporters working from home in all sorts of in all sorts of conditions. So,
and as Tony's saying, I mean, also in the newsroom, a lot of people are working remotely from home, and what we can see is, of course, I mean, like in any case, if you have a very, very small apartment and you are 2 adults working from home and then you have 3 children that are not allowed to go to school, of course, that causes a bit of strain and a problem. And if you already have problems within that household, that, of course, have been escalating. It can be, alcohol problems or, as I said, beating and bashing and things like that. But that doesn't really have to do with the gender equality in COVID-19 situation, even though, of course, the COVID-19 situation puts more pressure and makes situations more tense.
Thank you, Silla. The next question, actually, I'd like Tina Tin to take it. It says, what is your advice how to empower women to become camera women? To work behind the camera is often seen as a men's profession because of the physical skills and stereotypes. Tina Tin, do you have women cameramen?
I don't know. Yeah, this question is truly for me because my dream to have more camera women in my organization, because at the moment we are recruiting and we have a big gap there because industry is small and they cannot then have like other jobs somewhere else. So it's a fundamental problem in my country, but still we are trying to find them. We are trying to encourage them because there are so many professions in media, not only journalists, for instance, the editors, camera women, etc., who have to be the part of our big team. So we are working at the moment for that, and even more we are searching for it in the regions and trying to find them. And I do hope that next year we will get some results.
Thank you very much, Tina Tin. There's another question. Very interesting from Miriam Steger, says, how do you as media organizations actually reflect, analyze, and fight unconscious bias in your reporting? Who would like to take that?
We do unconscious bias training, and everybody goes through it. I've been through it myself, and I think it's remarkably effective. And I don't know how often we should keep on doing it. Probably quite often, because the kind of the conditions in which you're broadcasting changes. People were skeptical about it when we introduced it, but I really do think understanding your own biases, your own preconceptions, the way that you think, and overcoming that is important. Again, it goes back, I think, also to ensuring that you've got diversity of view and opinion and thinking around the table. Because again, it goes back to the fundamental points about diversity. I think making sure that when you choose people to be part of your team, they're not lots of mini-me's. They're not people who are all like you. You know, there are different people around from different backgrounds who are going to challenge you, who are going to make you think harder, because better things will come from that.
Thanks, Tony. There's another really, really interesting question from Krishan Arora. Says that you're all showing great leadership within your broadcasters. I wanted to ask you if you have all received the backing and concrete support from your governments, where still in many countries in Europe, there isn't enough female leadership.
I wouldn't want to have any backing from my government. I want to be independent from my government since we're not a state broadcaster. But I got a medal from the king. That was a great honor. So at least I've done something good. No, of course, I mean, it's important that you have people that back you up. And of course, you need your supporters. And I think I would never, ever have been in a position where I am if I wouldn't have had people that believed in me. Because, I mean, you're only as good as you are, but you also need people that sees your talent, that helps you nourish your talent, that backs you up when you're feeling down. And that could be not necessarily someone from the government, but people around you in different positions within the society. And of course, that helps.
Thanks, Sila. And while I have you, there's a question for you from Cécile Gréboval of the Council of Europe. She says, how did you manage to reach equal pay? And congratulations.
Well, we constantly check. I mean, Tony's talking about data. I mean, we know what people are earning, and each year when we go through with the unions, the next year's sort of pay raises, we look if there is any imbalance somewhere, and that has to be corrected before we go on to sort of to talk about the rest. So we have a fairly good system for keeping track, and we try to correct things where we see that is have been totally unjust. But that's also for us more of a historical view, actually, because since the whole place is so gender balanced, and we are not talking about gender when we talk about pay, we talk about qualities, and we talk about, I mean, certain targets that needs to be met, and certain, I mean, people with ambitions, and then we don't really care if it's a man or a woman. It's more about how you contribute in your daily work to the benefit of Swedish radio and to the benefit of the audience. So we are, I must say, and I'm lucky in that sense, we are beyond that, I would say, in our discussions. And that's most likely why we have equal pay, because it's not an issue.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sila. Tony, one last question for you from Jane Hoskinson from IATA. She says, Tony, thank you for being such a champion, so wonderful for a leader to have such passion about this. Can you provide any ideas for getting reticent male leaders on board?
That's a really smart question. I think, you know, it's talking around the organization. People often say, you know, the problem is probably not, the problem is men. You know, the problem is getting men to understand the importance of all forms of diversity and making them understand this is not a threat. This is actually about a threat to them. I mean, this is actually about getting great programs, getting great culture, and all of that. So I think it's a very smart question. My answer is, as I think Sila and I have been saying, it's about leadership. It's about allowing conversations about culture to take place. And we've been doing a lot of that over the last year and a half, 2 years, because I felt very, very strongly that one of the things I wanted to change at the BBC is a culture which, in my view, was too top-down, was too, in a way, militaristic. And what I wanted to do is to make it a culture where whoever you are, you want to come and work at the place at the BBC to do the best work of your lives. Because in the end, you know, we may not have the money, the euros, the dollars of a Netflix or an Amazon or whosoever. So what we've got to offer is the very best workplace with the very, very best people, where you really feel that's where I'm going to deliver fantastic work, whether I'm male, female, whatever my background, societal background, BME background, whatever, to do the best work in my lives.
Thank you, Tony. Absolutely fundamental. I have one last question for Tina Teen. I would like you to comment on something that we often discussed about how important is also female solidarity and the concept of women sending down the ladder. Many PSM public service media women are also looking up to you three today. Who helped you get there, and who are you helping today?
Yeah, absolutely. With my experience, that I was less likely supported by women during my career, be one honest. Although I'm always trying to encourage more women, pushing them to develop and support each other. And I always, my theory about women's solidarity, it does not exist. And men's solidarity, it's so common for everybody to drinking whiskey together and having some fun. So now what I'm doing really in this organization, and I'm really, really happy about that this young generation, and not only the young generation, because a lot of staff is seeing that something is happening in our country and in our organization, something really, really very positive. So I think that I'm truly engaging and trying to support them as much as I can. It's my personal motivation also.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Tina Teen Berzanishvili, Sila Benko, and Tony Hall for joining us today, for your openness, for such a brilliant and insightful discussion to launch this webinar, and for everything that you've done and you will do to keep to move the dial forward in public service media. Your enlightened and human-centric leadership is really a precious beacon for this community and for the industry. So if we were in a conference room, we would have had a long applause right now. Consider this, imagine it right now. We had it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So we would now move into the next agenda point, where I would like to introduce you to the framework that is illustrated in the report. Before we go into the details of the policies, I wanted to kind of explain you a little bit what the report is about. So as the steering group was researching, the best and the most effective policies and culture shifts within public service media, we realized that and we discovered an array of scenarios and context, and we realized that not one size fits all. There wasn't just one framework that we could be proposing. We had to acknowledge also different starting points. There's cultural changes, cultural differences. There's different societal dynamics. However, we did discover that there were some common threads that emerged, some elements that were common to all of the cases reviewed, and we identified some minimum viable denominators that we captured in 6 different chapters. The webinar today will focus on the first 3, and they're really around policy basically. We will see, we will start with the data. We will talk about how we need to start with data. We heard from Tony how that was a really crucial starting point. Why data? Because it's objective. Data takes the emotion away and, it paints an objective pictures. There's 2 types of data. There's the quantitative, there's the number, there's the breakdown of men and women within the organizations. But then there's also the qualitative, the feedback that comes from the staff that helps understand the stories behind certain situations. In the report, you will also find that we had listed a series of gender indicators that have been used and proposed by some of our members, and also by some work done by UNESCO already a few years back. So that it really is helpful to get started. And we will hear later on from 3 members on how they went about this. Then the second part, the second big chapter is the need for alignment. And again, we heard before from our leaders how you need to have everyone on board to enable change. Otherwise, it's just lip service and communications. But how do you do that? How do you really connect, with the motivations of everybody and make sure that, everybody is tuned in to the necessary change? And we will hear from Aviva Wittenberg-Cox. She's one of the best and most renowned thought leaders in this area. So we're really excited to have her with us today. And then the third part is, again, policies. So there's a need for clear and spelled out policies. In the report, we identified 6 particular families, areas where it's worth to have spelled out policies. Some organizations cover all of them. Some organizations focus only on some of them. It really depends upon, where you're at, what is your, cultural context. Today, we will focus on two particular areas. So the second part of the webinar, we will hear from experts talking about the process transparencies in recruitment and promotions and leadership development, because they're the two that really have the strongest impact in women, in gender equality and women's career advancement. And the second part of the framework will be addressed, as I said, in the second webinar in September. And it will tackle three really strong and dense chapters, but very, very important for the context of media. We will talk about work-life balance and work flexibility. And then, with everything that's happened in 2020 with COVID, we heard how there's been, an acceleration into these new ways of working, and how that, as pans in and affects gender balance. We will talk about eradicating toxicity, having the courage and having the good policies to make sure that biases, harassment, and all those phenomena that really impact women's career are being addressed properly and prevented even. We'll address the gender pay gap, which is probably the biggest discrimination, toward women. So I would like now to move on into the next part, and we welcome Bruno Laforesta, who's director for Move, which is one of the most innovative radios in France, and he's also the chair of Radio France Diversity Committee. Hello, Bruno.
Hello.
Hello, we see you and we hear you. That's great. Thank you for joining us. So why don't you start telling us about what is this diversity committee at Radio France? What is it about? Who is part of it, and what are you, as chair, what are you guys working on?
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I would say something about Radio France before that. We talk about executive committee in UBU, and in Radio France, there is more women, 16% of women in the executive committee of Radio France, and our CEO is Sibylle Veil, and we are proud now to have executive more women than men, and the point is now I'm the head of the diversity and equality committee, and I would say a few words about that. The point is sometimes we talk about professional equality inside the company, and on the one hand, on the other hand, we talk about the visibility of men and diversity on the screen on radio. And we talk inside Radio France. We think that that's a whole things, and we need a place to discuss the both in the same place. So the committee equality and diversity is the place where the people from programs, people from the journalists, and people from human resources and communication have the same policy, because it's a whole aspect of diversity and equality inside a media company. But what we are, it's what we show to, and what we do inside the company for payroll, for everything, is really important, even for people who listen to us. I can call that like equality 360, and this is the point of that committee. There were two women before me, head of FIP, Anne Rod and Bérénice Ravache, and Sibylle Veil asked me to be the president of this committee last October 2019. And the point is very important in that, because, in Radio France, our core business is the radio, numeric and digital, but we have 7 radio. It's our core business with 4,500%. And I think it's really important that the head of this committee was somebody from the core business of the company, which is editing radio, which is making programs, and she's working with people from the companies. That's the role of the committee, and to represent the interests of Radio France on that aspect.
Fantastic. So we have a slide here with the Radio France gender equality strategy pillars. Can you tell us a little bit about these 3 items?
Yeah. This is the first point about more the policy inside the company, and I will show you the index, because what I think, and Tony will speak about that. the data are really important, because we can say, okay, we are for equality, but this is words. We need data. And sometimes we say in France, in the law, since 47 years, there's somewhere written we are for equality. But it's only for 2 years that the government have a new law which oblige company to publish their statement, and we launched the index, equality index, with all the statement about the salary, about the promotion, about the increase rate, about the percentage of employee increased after return of maternity, and about the number of female employees among the 10 highest remuneration.
Excellent. And this is exactly it. So we were very much intrigued because you have devised and implemented this gender equality index. And there was a press release actually a couple of months ago saying that for 2019, you really enjoyed a strong rating. There's been a good advancement. So tell us, how does this index work? So we see that you have 5 different criteria, 5 different metrics that you're measuring. Who's measuring this, and how often are you looking at this? How does it work exactly?
So what we have to understand here, that the law, the government, we have a new law, and every company with more 250 people have to publish every year on March, the 31st of March, the index. This index is public and is on the website of the company, and you have to make it public. So the five rubric are quite not complex, but quite exhaustive. The salary gap, we have 4 groups of people from age, 4 types of age groups, and we measure the difference between men and women in each group, because sometimes it's true. Sometimes we have to check between people from 25 to 35 years, 35 to 50, 50 to 60, and more than 60. And so this is the first measure is the difference of remuneration between people in one group of age. In all company. In Radio France, we have 43% of women, 57% of men, and we measure the difference of salary in each group of age. This is the first point. After this, the second point, this is the increase rate, because we can measure in each group what is the increase year after year of your salary. And so this is another rate about, it was 2% for women, 2% for men in the group in general. This is the increase rate as an individual. We have, after the promotion rate gap, that changing from a category to another category, because that's not only the point of salary, the point of responsibility. So this is another measure. And there was a point which was very important, because sometimes, the difference of salary is during the maternity leave, because it can be 3 months, 4 months, and sometimes more. And so we apply a policy now in Radio France that every employee who go to maternity leave has systematically an increase, because this is the way not to lose some increase for the future. And for the fifth data is the number of female employees among the 10 highest remuneration of Radio France. And we take the top 10. And if you have more than 3%, is 0, is 2%. 2-3% is 5, and more than 4% of the minority gender is 10. So we improve a lot from 2018 to 2019, because for the first year we were in 73 and now 93. So we are quite really proud of that. This policy is with the human resources and civil. And what you have to understand of that law, that when you are under 75, the government gives you 3 years to improve. And if you are not improving, you can pay like 1% of your payroll. So this is the way we can work, and we can improve concrete things about inside the company, the salaries.
This is amazing. This is really interesting. And I guess it answers one of the earlier questions that we heard, how can media work with governments and how can governments give incentives also to, media and companies as well.
And it's for all the company, not only for Radio France. Radio France is really involved in that. This is one part of the data. We talk about salary and people inside the company. And after, we have the regulator in France named CSA. And since 2015, we work with the CSA about gender equality. And we have another type of data that 2 months a year, we listen all the radios of Radio France and we count number of women on the radio.
Okay.
We count for all intervention 2 months a year because it's quite, we involve like many persons in that work with exteriors people because and so we have now the rate of 43% of women in our radio speaking, and our goal is in 2022 having 50%. This is Civil give us this this goal, and we work increasing 10% a year for having gender equality on our radio in 2022. This is one part. And some people could say, yes, but it's not depend of women because what they talk about, it's not only the quantity, it's the quality, of the people. And so we have a second rate that we measure not 2 times a year, but every month is the part of expert women.
Yeah.
And so we chose 16 shows, which are the shows with people from university, with people from policy, people for all, the expert. And in these shows, every month we can calculate the number of experts. And now we have to improve it. It's 40% of the people who talk in this 16 show are women. So this is the second part of data we follow. And this is with the regulator, and it's an official data, not only inside, because the CSA, the regulator, check these data, and this is public too. So my point is having a policy is good. Having data with the policy is better.
The data helps fine-tune the policies and make it very, very targeted. It's very nice. Thanks, Bruno. I have a couple of questions from you from the audience. Francesca Scott, my colleague, says, do you agree that a certain amount of affirmative action, as France seems to be doing, is required to achieve global diversity across the board?
Global diversity across the board of Radio France?
I guess she's talking about affirmative action in France is required to achieve. Basically, she's saying, do we need to have affirmative action, to have global diversity? That's the question.
The point before we say sometimes simple things are more efficient than complex things.
Yes.
Simple things is the duty of the management, and what we changed with Sibyl Veil this year, that's the management, the top management, and all the middle management, maybe 400%, are on their objectives.
Objectives, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Objectives every year. We include the equality and the diversity goals. It's a way of evaluating every manager of Radio France. So we say you have to you know the guideline, our goals. You have to apply in your sector that. This is the first move, because if people are not engaged personally, sometimes it can be difficult, So this is the first thing we do. And after, it's question of when you look at the group and you have to make change, is the responsibility of each manager to say, okay, I have to equilibrate, I have to make social changement, make more diversity. And I can say that that's one of our goals for next year, because you have to improve in every part of the diversity. Because on the gender equality, we are not in 50, so we have to improve it, but we have the data. In France, for diversity, it's more complicated to having the data because it's quite illegal some parts, but it's the responsibility of the management because we have to be at the image of the society.
Fantastic. There's another question for you saying, dear Bruno, how would you respond to people who oppose quotas, who say that quotas affect the quality of work because people are hired or promoted based on their gender, not skills? And so what would you say? What is your point on that? A question from Tanya Reut.
There's a part of quota in France for a long time because, for example, for handicapped people, all the companies in France have to have 6% from people which have an handicap. Because we know that if we don't put that kind of rules, company won't do that at all. Maybe not now, but it's so. I'm for when you can evaluate exactly what is the problem, what is the point. I think it's a good thing to do something. And about women, there's no discussion in France that there's 51% of women in France, and this is real, and we have to work on this reality. So that's not quota, but this is a measure, and we put an objective, a goals for this measure. For the diversity, ethnical diversity, social diversity, the measure is more complicated because you have some people, they don't define themselves as people from diversity. So we have to improve on that and not putting quota, but in putting responsibility of the management and the public, what we said before, the public understand the difference between a company which promote diversity and another company. So this is as a public media, this is our objective, and the government, this is one of our main goals for contract with the government every year.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us and being with us today, Bruno, all the way from Paris. Stay safe in Paris, in France, and we hope to see you soon. So I would like now to invite the next speaker, Marianne Bell from BBC. Let me see if I can go. Marianne Bell from BBC. I'm very excited to have her with us. Marianne, are you with us?
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello, great to see you. So yes, I'm very excited because you've been a pivotal individual in the making of the EBU report. Your story and then your tangible support at several stages have been really amazing. So you have led a very fascinating strategic project which started in 2018 to support equal advancement for men and women. And it started by harnessing a significant amount of qualitative feedback. So, this is, we're in the area of using data, using, qualitative data as well in order to decide, how to set the plan. And in fact, your title has been Culture and Progression Lead. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this process.
So thank you for inviting me and hello to everyone. The BBC's Culture and Progression Transformation, which included significant work around flexible working, started over 2 years ago. And little did we expect back then just how crucial this culture work would be in preparing us for a global pandemic to maintain vital services to audiences. So back in 2018, the Director General, Tony Hall, announced a series of reviews with the aim of leading decisive action for change. I was asked to lead on gender. My background in the BBC is in editorial, so my approach was to apply the rigour of journalistic principles to the process through data and breadth of research, whilst keeping the audience, the BBC staff, front and centre. So this rooted my work in 3 areas, which I think ultimately led to the success. Firstly, listening to the stories and experiences of our staff, good and bad, women and men. It involved reviewing staff data through a D&I lens right across the organisation and learning from the experiences of other companies. So this approach delivered 5,000 ideas and comments from staff. It shone a light on where and how we were doing well in the BBC and, of course, not so well. And we had insights on how around 30 other companies across all sectors were making progress. This resulted in the recommendations for change, and the research was published in the report that you can see on the screen, something I'm very proud of because we didn't look to sugarcoat what we discovered, and the recommendations for change had the unequivocal backing of the Director General.
Tell us a little bit more about what's been then the result of this massive exercise.
Yes, of course. So the 5,000 comments and ideas translated into a relatively small number of themes, which I hope you'll be able to see shortly on the screen. Importantly, it meant that our actions could be highly relevant to the experiences of our staff and focused on a small number of themes to create high impact. So, for example, if we focus on the actions for flexible working, we introduced a number of measures. Firstly, a new and progressive policy which committed to doing everything possible to support remote and flexible working, combined with an on-demand training program for team leaders so that they were supported in applying this new thinking. In recruitment, saying all vacancies would be advertised with flexible working options available as a default position unless agreed otherwise. We delivered 2 high-impact communication campaigns, a first called A Fresh Look at Flex and a second, Flex in Action, featuring some incredible stories of staff working flexibly, men and women, for a range of different reasons. And we launched pilots, one a remote first way of working with our design and engineering division, where all meetings took place remotely for 2 months. And of course, little did we know then that this would be the way for so many of us in 2020. So bringing things up to date now, COVID has meant that we've had to dramatically reduce occupancy rates in our buildings to protect our staff and services for audiences. And as we know, necessity is often the mother of invention. Yeah. And we recognise that we have an enormous opportunity now to accelerate culture change, particularly on attitudes to flexible working. You heard Tony mention we've gone back into consultation with our staff in the last few weeks, carrying out a pulse survey. And almost half of the organisation is asking us to retain some elements of flexible and remote working as we unlock.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Marianne. This is like a really, really case study that I think that will stay, for a long time. Stay with us. We're going to now move on to Anne Foster, but stay with us because we will call you back for the Q&A afterwards. So our next speaker is Anne Foster, who's the head of workforce diversity and inclusion at the BBC. Anne, welcome.
Hi, Claudia.
Hello, good to see you again. So thank you for being with us. You have joined the BBC recently in January 2020. So as I said, your title is Head of Workforce Diversity and Inclusion, which speaks loudly for the organization's commitment to keep driving this cultural change, started before. So tell us about your role and what can you anticipate of the new strategy that you're currently preparing?
In terms of the role, I think Tony said at the beginning that there's 2 teams now. So to make sure that there was real focus on diversity and inclusion and that it was threaded through both the kind of creative side and the workforce side, we now have 2 teams. So June Sarpong and her colleague Miranda Wayland are leading the creative diversity unit, and I'm working with a brilliant team of people in the workforce diversity and inclusion. So together we're trying to make sure that we can really accelerate in terms of what we're trying to do here. You asked about the D&I strategy. So kind of moving on or taking on what Marianne was talking about with the qualitative data, we are reviewing our diversity and inclusion strategy. It's been a 5-year strategy. And that ends this year, but rather than wait until we get to the end of the year to review it, we're starting that now with the intention of having a 3-year strategy that is going to be rooted in evidence. So it's getting that kind of qualitative response from our staff and from other external stakeholders to say, what's changed? What's really made a difference in terms of our existing strategy and the culture and progression work streams that Marianne has been outlined. What still needs to happen, where are the barriers to progress and what can we do to really move things on a pace? So what will our new strategy look like based on what people are telling us? We recognise that it's kind of quite challenging in terms of the timing with COVID-19 and what that's done for us. Pretty important that we keep this as a priority. So at a time when people are feeling unsettled, having that underpinning of strategy that's rooted in evidence, part of people feeling valued and represented. So that's what we're working towards. We've done our stakeholder mapping, and we're now into the next phases. So we've got really 3 key phases, which are consultation, collation and reviewing, and then recommendations and launching our new strategy. So an online survey. We conduct one-to-one interviews, and we'll be running focus groups and trying to make sure that, I know that we're talking about gender here, but intersectionality is really at the heart of it. Never felt, we need to go further, so that's what we're intending to do. And we want to make sure that this is confidential, so anything that people provide to us is not attributable, and that people understand that it's a pan-BBC transparent process. And I don't want to preempt any of the findings, but we our attention is to have a simple, very clear diversity and inclusion strategy at the end of it, which is easy to understand and it's transportable, so that people can really get a feel for it, and that people can use it in their departments or in their areas, and that we can measure as part of that. There's been quite a lot of talk about targets. And obviously, we do expect that targets will be part of the strategy, the ongoing strategy. But really important to make sure that the targets are based on something that is achievable, stretching, but that it's achievable. So rather than say, oh, we'll just do a target that's more than we've had hitherto, we're going to make sure we're looking at, well, what does it mean in a post-COVID-19 or within this current situation? So that it really needs to be based on turnover, vacancies that we have, what's the churn that the organisation has, and that will be the metric for our important part is that qualitative piece. And I think somebody in the chat talked about that. I think Elise.
Excellent. That's really important. Absolutely. Well, so it sounds like you have a busy role and a busy year ahead, and a lot of great things to look at. How just a quick question for you, Anne, as well. So, how has the COVID crisis changed the paradigm? In terms of gender equality, is this a threat or an opportunity? How do you see things in the current circumstances?
I think it's both. It's a threat and an opportunity. I think we've got advantages and disadvantages here. I think a key advantage or opportunity for us is structural. And this is something that female academics in particular have been talking about for a very long time. Structurally, we need to change how we work because that will reap the biggest rewards. So why is it that we're all coming in at 9 a.m., finishing at 5? So we've got this big structural opportunity, which is fantastic. About the fact that with a radical change like that, we want to keep it. We don't want to snap back. So how do we make sure that we keep it? Independence is obviously a big one. There's a disproportionate impact on women. And if you look at, there's a recent article talking about the impact on female academics in terms of their submissions. It's gone through the floor. And part of that is that people are saying, well, I'm having the childcare arrangements, so that falls on me. That then has a financial impact, and it potentially has an impact in terms of women's progression as well and career opportunity. So I think we really need to think about that. And in terms of broadcasting, what does that mean for content? Does that mean fewer women putting themselves forward in terms of writing content, producing content, etc.? And importantly, embedding. How can we make sure that we embed this, as I said before, that we snap back? And I think Scylla talked about whether it's part of our DNA, and this is a real test for that. Is it part of our DNA? And then there's lots of other stuff about things like the effects on mental well-being, and we have this shadow pandemic in terms of domestic abuse and the figures for that rocketing.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. Well, we look forward to keeping in touch with you and see how things progress, as you set your strategies and deploy it, especially. We have some questions. So Marianne, come back with us, please. We have some questions, actually, a question for Marianne from Nathalie Aslan from Paris. She is writing from a network of women involved in mobility. She says, Marianne, thank you for intervention. Very interesting. What about education? She says, what about women behind cameras or driving trucks? The role of schools, whatever the level, is it important, to how can school and education also, channel women into these directions and these careers? And what do you think about that? Is it something that you guys are looking into as well or have looked at?
Absolutely. I mean, it is vital. It's the pipeline of talent, which is so absolutely crucial. And certainly as part of these conversations, I did get together with academics in the education establishments to look at how we could support them bring women on into technical spheres particularly. And the BBC actually has a very strong track record of working with schools. So in my editorial time, actually, I've been editor-in-chief of something which we called School Report, which is basically working with schools to inspire children to consider journalism as a career, to support story and storytelling. And so actually that combination of us inspiring young people to consider the career opportunities in the media. You heard Tony talk about apprentices and the importance that is to the organisation, combined with supporting people, teachers, academics to understand and unlock the media is absolutely crucial in this work that we're doing, because it's a pipeline we need to create here.
Thank you, Marianne. And a question for you both. I mean, when we look at the work that you have done and you will be doing in terms of harnessing all this staff consulting, and you mentioned a mix of online surveys, but also focus groups, one-to-one. And, if we contextualize it within the BBC, which is one of the largest public service media organizations, I think that you have up to 20,000 employees. The scales is vertiginous. So how do you handle the scale? How do you manage to capture all voices? Do you work with personas? Like, how do you do that?
Shall I start, Marianne? Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely crucial. So one of the first things that we're going to be doing is trying to make sure that we're being absolutely transparent and banging the drum about why this is important. So that lots of people will feel that they want to participate. We need to make sure that we are working very closely with our staff networks and that they feel engaged and that they want to also encourage their members to be part of it. And as part of our stakeholder map, we've looked at, who are those voices who we absolutely have to hear from. So, we have to have our executive committee. We want people who are responsible for policy, but we also need to make sure that we've got people across the piece. So we're going to be running multiple focus groups, multiple interviews. There's going to be a team of people doing that, all providing the same assurances around confidentiality and what we're doing with the data. And really, I'm hoping that we've got lots of champions in the organisation who inclusion is running through their veins. They feel it as passionate as my team and I do, and other really important stakeholders, and that will keep us through. But we will have to do a piece at the end to look at how have we captured all the voices, whose voices are missing, and do they relate to particular characteristics, and what else do we need to do then to ensure that those voices are heard and captured.
Thank you very much to both of you for joining us today and sharing this exciting journey. As I said, we look forward to staying in touch and then, to keep checking on this exciting evolution. Thank you, Marianne and Anne. So in the next section now, we will be moving on and we will review then now the policies that make all these changes possible. So we talked about it before, there's 6 families of policies, and we will focus now on 2 particular areas. So the most progressive organizations on gender equality, they've drafted a strategy and they have outlined policies that define equality. Equal opportunities for men and women are clearly identified as the desirable outcome. A strategy will address the existing areas of discrimination, and a policy will enable action to deliver equality. And it's important to stress that a formal policy on gender equality will highlight an organization's attitude and values regarding equality and gender diversity in the workforce. It should outline the process for eradicating prejudice and inequality and state how the workplace should improve in terms of fair treatment. So last year with the steering group, we researched across the EU members, as I said before, all the public service media companies of Europe, and we discovered a wide array of daring, creative, and sophisticated policies. You will see in the reports, and the slide here highlight, we propose a list of families to be considered, and we explain why it's important to have clear, spelled out, and shared policies. They represent the law. They provide a safety framework of what is possible and what is not tolerated. The next two panels, so will take us through two types of policies. First we will focus on process transparency in recruitment and promotion, and then we will talk about later on leadership development. So for the first panel, I'd like to invite and welcome Han Holmgren, who's head of employer branding, diversity and inclusion of Swedish Radio, and Estelle Kupperschmidt, who's organizational and development manager at the Belgian French-speaking broadcasters RTBF. So welcome to the webinar, and then Estelle. And I would like to start with a question to Estelle. How has the situation evolved in RTBF in terms of percentage of women staff and management? So tell us the numbers, tell us the data.
Yeah. Hello. The overall staff breakdown shows 39% as women within RTBF. It's quite less than that we heard previously from others, but RTBF has little turnover, so it's quite difficult to improve this data. We went from 38 to 39% in 5 years, although we are hiring externally around 50% of women per year. So we have worked to have more women in senior management position. Women senior leaders represent 42% in 2019, and they were 30% in 2015. And by senior leaders, we mean the executive committee members and the 2 layers reporting to them. So during the transformation of RTBF in 2018, most of these top positions have been opened because of the new organization, and we succeed to improve this data with almost only internal mobility, meaning recruiting internal talents.
Excellent. Thank you, Estelle. Thank you for the transparency and good news to see the progression. And I'm sure you and your teams will keep on working on this. Can you tell us perhaps what specific tactics did you put in place to overcome the situation?
I think overall, diversity is fundamental for us, and we make sure it is known internally. Upon reviewing our values in 2017, diversity was selected by our employees, and it is now one of our 5 key values. In the meantime, HR business partners and HR recruiters have been trained to understand unconscious bias, and with a focus on recruitment process. From a recruitment perspective, we are always striving to have a process that is as neutral, as transparent as possible. All jobs are opened, and for years we are using alternative recruitment channels, for example, social network also. The same selection process is applied to everyone. And maybe during the change in our organization in 2018, we made sure to communicate on how the recruitment process works for the new executive position. We highlighted diversity as being very important to the process. Another things maybe that it's important is that recruitment is based on competencies, especially on soft skills. We have recently reworked our soft skill referential that includes leadership competencies, and we made sure our shift on leadership is developing more inclusive leaders. Also, we have created recruitment manual for recruiters in order to make sure that we ask relevant and not biased questions regarding all these soft skills and the values. And maybe also something important, our job description were already gender neutral for years, mentioning, male, female in the title. But now we are going one step further, also applying inclusive writing in the job description.
Thank you very much. I'd like to, Estelle, very good and pointy, clearly very laser sharp type of tactics. I'd like to call now Anne Holmgren. Are you with us?
Yes, hi, I'm with you.
Fantastic, good to have you, Anne. Yes. You're with Swedish Radio, and it's interesting also for us, when we look at our membership, we have all kind of broadcasters. We have, national broadcasters, international broadcasters. We have radios, which is a very important medium as well. So Swedish Radio, we heard from your CEO before, from Silla. It's not only already gender Equal, but it's also a company which has received several recognition. In 2019, you were awarded as the most gender balanced company in Sweden. Congratulations again. So this is a recognition of a long-term commitment. We heard a little bit from Sila, but I'd like to hear from you, from your standpoint about this. You know, how long did it take? How did you get there?
Well, I think, like Sila said, that it is a long-term commitment, and I think also this prize also and the Swedish Radio is mirroring the Swedish society as a whole, because it's. I mean, we've been working on this for decades, and it's something that we do take for granted. But yes, we have done a lot of work with our employer brand, as Sila mentioned, that it's really and on the Swedish Radio brand. We are working on conscious recruitment in everything we do. We've been working hard to reach equal pay. I think last year and year before that, we have 100% gender balanced salaries, which is wonderful. And right now we try to focus even more on how to build a truly inclusive working environment. Gender balance being one of many aspects that we need to take into account as a public service company.
Fantastic. So when you say that you're working on the employer brand, we saw before some if we can have them again, some illustration of some of the adverts that you place. Can you tell us a little bit more in detail? What is this about? What does it say? And how are you, what does it mean working on the employer brand? What are you doing practically?
Yes. So yeah, this is just one example on how we wanted to show a bit more fun and light way of us as an employer, highlight diversity and women who apparently looks very happy. And we actually produced a job advertising guide for all the HR business partners and all the managers, focusing on inclusive languages, really focusing on our values, our work culture, and more on the teams that they are going to be a part of. And also, like Estelle said, we really worked with social media networks. And also on our career site, we highlight that we are a gender balanced employer. Just a few examples.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Estelle, back to you. When we talked, you told me how also you did extensive work, on the process for recruitment at the C-level. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, indeed. The selection process of executive is quite heavy, but all jobs are published. That's the first thing. And when they apply, the candidates must also include a file explaining their view on the function. So it's in addition to the classical CV and motivation letter. For the executive position on top of the regular selection process, final candidates must attend a one-day assessment in an external assessment center. And this assessment focuses on leadership competencies and soft skills. But also we have a selection committee, which is put together depending on the job types. So we are a public company, so it's depending on the level and the type of the position. And so the committee is made up of a mix of top executive, but sometimes also external experts. We realized that these committees were often skewed towards male. And we thought that it did not help to bring in more women as senior executive. So we worked on adjusting the makeup of the selection committee by ensuring there were always women on board as well. We did it on an agile way, working on improving the configuration of selection committee, but not using quotas, to be honest. And then in 2080s, as you can see, 49% of the committees were primarily made up of men. But in 2019, just 1 year after, we decreased this number to 18%. And as Ford mentioned, we are now 42% women senior leaders. So probably it had helped somewhere.
Excellent. It's quite impressive, and it really shows how, by looking at the data, you can really come up with strategies and tactics that can correct the complete situation. Really fascinating story to hear. Anne, back to you. Quick questions on sports radio. Sports radio, we know, is sports in general and sports radio is an area also where we're still seeing fewer women, especially on screen. How have you approached it, and what's going on at Swedish Radio?
Yes, so a couple of years ago, we had a women's reference project with the goal that we needed that 3 out of 5 new recruits had to be a woman. So we had a diversity group working together with this, and they took a variety of actions, but one of them was that we recruited only female interns to our internships. And being an intern at Sweden is a very good career path to get into the Swedish radio. And we still hold that goal that we need to focus on the women to our sports department. So we actually succeeded going from, I think it was 15% up until 31% women at the moment.
Excellent, really nice.
Small things that makes a difference.
Yeah, but it's you double the percentage and you're going in the right direction, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And what about, we also talked about women in tech. That is, we know it's like one of the areas that are still very heavily skewed male, and it's very hard to tackle. What have been your, some of your strategies? I know that you worked really hard on that, and you have some really creative ideas to share with us.
Yes. Like on everywhere, you need to work on many different levels at the same time. But what we have done is that we, like I said before, we research what social media groups where women do hang out, like pink programming and women in tech and so on. And so we try to nestle in and requesting access to those social media groups. And trying to highlight the Swedish culture, work-life balance, and our cool, innovative tech department. And also we have arranged a couple of meetups where female participants always are a priority. If it's fully booked, we always make sure that the women will have a spot there. So we have, I think we had like 40 or 50% women last meetup. And here is a picture on our creative lab, which is, we are, if COVID-19 allows us, we are arranging it this year again in August for the 3rd time. This is a very fun and creative week where we bring in 20 candidates who are, where we are in a week that's very creative. We work with we work with, they get to see all the tech that we do, all the innovations, and they come up with new ideas for the Swedish radio. It's such a nice thing to bring in the young people, and we have like 60 or 70% female participants in this meetup. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, like, these are really like concrete, actions and tactics that anybody can, copy and paste and replicate in their ideal. I liked also a lot of what you told me about, working with social media, trying to establish your brand before you have openings, actually, and trying to really connect with groups like Women in Tech or women coders or these type of things, so that SR is known before you have actually openings. I find that very innovative. Thank you for sharing. I have a question for both of you. As HR professionals, what is your opinion on gender neutral writing? and inclusive writing for job descriptions. I don't know if how does it work in French and in Swedish. It's something that we hear a lot as a technique in certain languages, but I don't know if it's relevant for your markets. Can you comment on that? I don't know who would like to take it first.
I will take it first then.
Thanks, Estelle.
As I said at the beginning, we had gender neutral titles of the job description. It was just mentioned male, female, and everything is in French for us. So in French, inclusive writing changed really something. So indeed, now we are really taking a step further and implementing inclusive writing in the job description. I think there is a lot of explanation that it changed something for the people who are reading it. So yeah, I'm quite convinced that it's important.
That's good to know. Thank you, Estelle. Anne, would you like to comment on that, or is it irrelevant for Swedish?
Yes, I think it's a bit irrelevant. Of course, we always use an inclusive language, but I think that we in what we do is that if we are looking for female developers, we actually write that in our ads, where we even in the headline we can address women if we need to hire more women.
Excellent. Thank you both very, very much for being with us today and sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure. And let's stay in touch, of course. And it's great to see, HR strongly aligned with gender equality. So we're now down to the last panel of this webinar. And this is a fascinating topic, very dear to my heart and very crucial to the gender equality paradigm. So which are the policies that contribute to leadership development? How can organizations truly harness the in-house talent and enable everyone, men and women, to develop leadership skills and aspirations? But more specifically for women, how do we encourage the same rate of professional development, trainings, upskilling, and career progressions as men? There's a wealth of research on how women careers do not enjoy, on average, the same uphill curve as that of men. In the report, you will read extensively about the impact that maternity has. But we also learned that specific policies and goals, qualitative goals, can help harnessing the vastly untapped talent of women. So we have with us three of the finest experts on the matter among the EBU membership with a lot of experience. We have Sandra David, who's Equal Opportunity Officer with RDBR, the Munich-based German broadcaster. We have Teresa Muñoz Guerra. She's a Quality Officer with RTVE in Spain. And then we have all the way from Toronto in Canada, Nikki Davies, who is Director of Diversity and Inclusion from CBC Radio Canada. So thank you for being with us, all three. I'd like to start with Sandra. Hello, Sandra.
Hello, Claudia.
Great to see you. So can you tell me about your role and how's the organization structured, for gender equality?
Yeah, I've been Equal Opportunity Officer at BR for over 5 years. BR is a member of the ARD, and this is an association of 11 public service media stations across Germany. And every broadcasting company has an Equal Opportunity Officer. And as a rule, we all report directly to the Director General, and we are free of instructions. And we have, for example, all equality plans, which is, from my point of view, very important instrument, because the plan set out goals for more equality, which broadcasters must implement within 3 years. And for the controlling, we prepare an annual report that shows where the broadcasters stand in terms of equality. But I think the main problem is that we need a rethink in the minds of managers. We have many programs, but equality is not lived with heart and passion, and the priority could be a little bit higher. For example, at BR, we have a balanced mix of men and women currently. But if you look at the figures for women in senior management positions, the picture is a little bit different. Now we have reached 35% women in leadership, and there is still some air up here. But in this job, it's this job high-up rates aren't very easy because some reasons are we have large budget cuts currently. Jobs are being cut or are no longer filled, even in management positions. And we have a very low fluctuation and a very high number of years of service. For example, this is at BR 18 years. Right. And so my daily work is therefore to ensure that BR is a workplace with an equal opportunities and with equal opportunities and employee with a positive measure.
Thanks for sharing that. It's it's like many other public service broadcasters is at the moment a lot about agility, is like working with diminished means, but at the same time, embedding all the work that you're doing and embedding these goals and these notions. So, tell us maybe a little bit about what type of programs you have developed and implemented specifically for female leadership development. I know that you've worked on that. You mentioned how sometimes certain positions cannot be refilled externally. You're not hiring externally. So I guess, you're investing a lot in your in-house talent.
Yeah, I think as we heard from Aviva, we are in Germany a little bit old-fashioned because at ARD we have a wide range of offers to promote women. For example, BR has recently launched a program for more women in leadership positions, which includes classic succession planning with short-term and long-term goals. But I would like to present two other points today. One of these offers is a cross-mentoring program, especially for women. And I'm really proud that we are supporting the program because it's very helpful for women who are just on the beginning on their journey as leaders. And mentee and mentor are employed in different companies and are brought together across companies. And this leads to an open exchange of experience across hierarchical and company boundaries. And the 12-month program supports female leaders to advance both personally and professionally. And the organization of the program is managed by an external agency. And you must always have a mentee and a mentor. And the mentor must also be an experienced manager in a high position. And the second point is our Girls and Boys Day. It's a nationwide day of action in Germany to get girls interested in technical professions and boys in the commercial professions. On this day, young people get a taste of jobs that are not typical for the respective gender. And at BR, the girls learn what you do as a camera woman, picture mixer, or sound engineer. And they make a film which is then shown at the final event in the evening. And the boys are introduced to the diverse career opportunities in the commercial sector, and they will be responsible for planning and organizing the final event on this day. Yeah, and this was a small selection from our different programs.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. And actually, you can find out more about the BR's programs on the report. There's a wonderful interview with Sandra on page 30, and you will find all the other programs that they've implemented. It's quite extensive. Thanks so much, Sandra. So lastly, I found a very beautiful and interesting picture of you. What can you tell us about it? What were you doing there with a drill?
Yes, the drill. Look at here. I always have it to hand. So, yeah. So, when something moves very slowly in Germany and nothing changes, we have a saying, you have to drill thick boards. And as an equal opportunity officer, you have to drill some thick boards every day because otherwise nothing would happen in terms of equality. And the picture is from our yearly event. The public service media of Germany and Austria organize a Women in Media conference hosted each year by a different organization and led by the respective equality officer. And 2 years ago, BR hosted the 3 days conference with 400 women with the title, "The Sky is Not the Limit." It featured 43 internal and external speakers and over 24 workshops on topics ranging from digital innovation to change in companies. And this annual meeting also empowers the relations between the organizations from ARD, ZDF, and ORF. And yeah, it's a great success every year.
Fantastic. Well, let us know when the next one will take place. I guess for 2020, probably like many other events, it's suspended, but we'll be happy to join you at the next one.
Yes.
Thank you, Sandra. We will take questions for you at the end of the session. I'd like now to call to join us Teresa Muñoz-Guerra. As I said, is Equality Officer at RTVE in Madrid. And she's also a member, just like Sandra, she's also a member of the steering group. Hi, Teresa, welcome.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Teresa, Spain is a fascinating country because it is leading really an acceleration in terms of changing the mentalities and the place of women in society. The government has introduced some progressive legislation, notably on paternity leave, and RTV has been a huge vector running campaigns and to prevent violence against women and reduce phenomena like femicide. RTV has also been working very intensely internally, and you had a strong growth of women leaders in the past. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, in the last 2 years and a half, we've had an increase of women leadership. As you said, by 2017, the amount of women in directive and making decision position was 27%. But by December in 2019, those figures changed and women are now 36.7%. And we have some cases like radio where we had no directive women, but now we have 2. And even in the high direction board, there were no women by 2017, and today they are 4 out of 8.
Excellent. And so what can you share, some of the initiatives that have helped this process and this evolution?
Well, RTV has an equality commission, and every 6 months gathers all the data regarding gender balance within the company. And the outcome of that research showed that we needed to develop internal talent. So it became an opportunity to focus on upskilling our staff and develop programs specifically for women. And to make these programs, what we did was use 3 main pillars. The first one was a series of training, and it was for developing leaders. We had several courses like Talentia 360 in 60, that is an executive education for women, that is delivered by the National Women's Institute and the Industrial Organization School. We have Promociona, that it's an MBA for women executive, and now 4 of our coworkers are attending. And the Directive Skills Programs, that it's a program on soft skills. And 3 women from TV attended last year's and had really good results. And in fact, their final project was awarded as the best of the year. So with all these actions, what we've done is create a pipeline of women ready for senior leadership roles. And I'm glad to say that one of these colleagues of the Director Skill Program has been named manager a couple of months ago.
Excellent.
Yeah, so it's been
there's
good.
Impact.
Yeah.
There's measurable impact of your service.
We can measure. Our second pillar is awareness. We've had several sessions and workshops to understand how unconscious bias and even the use of language shapes our reality and, of course, our company too. We've had 3 editions of the workshop Inclusive Leadership, and almost 60 directors and managers came and attended. And there we all learned about the gaps and the hurdles that women face every day. We've had several sessions for the whole workforce too, about the use of the language in a non-sexist way, and some special training for people within internal communication and administration about the use of inclusive Spanish. And then we have had specific courses and session about journalism from a gender perspective. And we've had special attention for violence against women there.
Can you delve a little bit, when you say journalism from a gender perspective, can you give us some example? What do you mean exactly?
We are trying to train our journalists to open to open the way that they put in the news and to change the way that women are pictured in them, as Avaiga say, for example, like leaders and not always victims. But we've made, for example, a really, really good highlight in not using the term domestic violence anymore, since in Spanish, something domestic unconsciously refers to something that happens in privacy, in intimacy, and that only belongs to the personal sphere, and that is not real with gender-based violence. So we do have as a responsibility as public service media, and in fact, in Spain, RTV has a mandatory, and we have to fight gender-based violence by law. So, and even in this COVID crisis, for example, United Nations has alerted about the risk of confinement for thousands of women around the world and the increase of violence against women. So we as a public service media, we've made a public call for society to get involved and to help end with this huge problem, and to show that violence against women is a social issue. It's not only personal, it's not only domestic, it's not internal. So to show that it has to do with human rights, and it's very important to show it and to use a language that refers and reflects this properly.
That's super interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Teresa. It will be interesting to do a comparative studies to see on how does it plan in some of the other languages as well. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you so much. We now have, stay with us for the Q&A. We now have Nikki Davis, Director of Engagement and Inclusion from CBC Radio-Canada, connecting from Toronto. Nikki, are you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Hello, Nikki. Welcome. Good to have you with us. So CBC Radio-Canada is actually not only an already gender equal company. You told me when we last spoke that you actually have 60% women, in staff and 59% in leadership, if I remember correctly. So can you give us quickly, an example? How did you get there, and what are your current hiring targets and retention plans?
In terms of gender balance, we've been there for quite a while at CBC. I mean, one of the things that we're really trying to do now is to fix the balance of our other equity-seeking groups who don't have balance. I mean, when we look at the amount of women in leadership, in our last measurement stats, we have 58% of leaders, and so just like as Sandra said, the challenge is that we actually have a gender balance and an equity balance company in terms of how many people work there. But what we decided to do was we realized that we had a lack of people from equity-seeking groups in management. And so what we did is we created a program, and it's called DEL, Developing Diverse Emerging Leaders. And this program, it forced leaders in the company and managers to take a look at their teams and say, okay, of the people who work here in our department, which one of these people have potential to be leaders? And it forced them to identify it in a way that they weren't doing it before. I mean, when we went in and canvassed some of the other leadership courses that were being held at CBC, we realized there was not a lot of people from equity-seeking groups in them. So the managers were picking people to go to these leadership courses who mostly looked like them and did not look like our equity-seeking group. So we created this program, and that's the whole intent of it, is to actually force managers to take a look at their teams and make, hey, who on this team actually has leadership potential, who wants to be a leader? And then we find that out, and then we put them through a leadership training program. And our program, DEL, it's considered by our company, it has really high status in our company. If you go through DEL at CBC, the likelihood of you becoming getting a job promotion or being elevated in the company is really high. Each cohort has 16 people. We're on to our fourth cohort of DEL. And of the people and of the people who've been through it, more than half of them have already been promoted in their job, almost like more than half. And I'd say around a third of them have gone into management. So the program's been really successful. This gives people an opportunity. One of the strengths of this program, which I think makes it a little bit better than the other leadership programs, that it is taught through a lens of inclusion and engagement. And the people who teach it look like the people who are in the course. And they teach it from their own experience, and they get real lessons on what it means to be a diverse leader and the challenges that they face doing that. And that's why people crave, who are from diversity or equity seeking groups, to be part of DEL, a very competitive program to get in. We can only afford to do 16 a year. We have over 80 applicants almost every year for the program. And so it's been a success. That's one of the things that we do, one of the tools we use to try and make sure that we're elevating people from equity seeking groups into management positions.
Excellent. There's I read a strong element of role modeling into it as well, which is really admirable. Maybe for some of our audience who's not so familiar with the Canadian society and audience, can you just maybe share some facts? I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned you're working a lot on intersectionality because you really ultimately want to reflect properly the great diversity of the Canadian audience. I mean, for one thing, it's a bilingual country, but then we also know there's a lot of immigration. What are some of the top groups that you are targeting?
Well, the groups that we're trying to target are visible minorities. We have a huge immigrant class in Canada. You're right. Canada right now, if you take a look as a country, it hovers around, I'd say 20-something% of the country are visible minorities. But if you look at the main centers like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, like in the city of Toronto, 60% of the population is visible minority, 60%. And our company does not look anything like that, our Toronto office. I mean, we need to get there. We're doing quite well. But if you look at the place where we under index in terms of hiring external hires, where we under index in terms of management is in visible minorities, in Indigenous people, in people with disabilities. Like we under index grossly. And so that's what we're trying to fix. And so as a country, we are we're one of the most multicultural, countries in the world. And Toronto as a city and Vancouver are particularly some of the most multicultural cities in the entire world. And so we want to make sure that our company and the people that look, the content that you see on TV and the people who produce and make that content are actually reflective of the country that we serve.
Thank you. And what, I know you also have worked quite a bit on attracting women in technology. I know you already have some women senior leaders. We know Roma, who's leading brilliantly, the GEM player. But what can you tell us about what you've done, to increase the ratio there?
Yeah, we run these employee resource groups at CBC, and what we're really trying to do is we realize there's a huge gap in terms of leadership in women in technology in that department. And so we have a woman in a technology ERG employee resource group. And what they do is they come up with initiatives and ideas in which helping the company understand where these gaps are, how to kind of resolve some of these gaps. They make it a real point to highlight and attract other talented women into that field of technology at CBC. It's an amazing ERG with an amazing group of people who run it. It's actually one of the Sue Kim, who's head of our who's the head of our what we call our change department at CBC. She actually is the executive sponsor of it. She's a big deal. She's she's one of two people of color who sit on the CBC English Services executive team, her and myself. And she makes a big point of making sure she supports that group and in all their initiatives. And they're making waves. I mean, there's lots of women who are going to benefit from that program, but we had to create it. It's like you've heard throughout the day, like you have to create these opportunities, and no better time to do it than a pandemic. I mean, like Tony from the BBC said that, here's a time when we should take advantage of these opportunities, not run away from it. We need to make sure that we should be pushing forward more during these times, because if we're going to create new, like the way I see it, if we're going to create new ways of working and new systems of operating, we should actually create these systems through a lens of inclusion and engagement. And if we're doing that right from the start, then we'll actually build a better foundation for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nikki. Really, really super interesting case. We are running, unfortunately, 20 minutes late. We apologize. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to be skipping the Q&A, but I promise we will take all of your questions bilaterally. We'll get a Q&A answer for all of you. So thank you very much, Sandra, Teresa, and Nikki. And I'd like now to move on to our final section, introduce our final speaker, the EBU Director General, Noel Curran, for some final remarks. Noel has been incredibly supportive of this program at the EBU, and I'd like also extend a personal thank for your leadership, your engagement, your commitment, not only to support the members, but also the EBU's own journey. Over to you, Noel.
Thanks, Claudia. Welcome, everybody. And I just want to say a few words, really. First of all, to say thank you. First off, to the contributors. I watched all of today's session, and it was really, really strong. Yeah, I suppose what you always look out for is, have you learned anything? So I've learned a lot and taken a lot of notes. So thank you to everybody. I want to thank Tinnitin, who has become a leader in this area for public service media across Europe. Thank you, and for all of the work you're doing with the members right across Europe, north, south, east, and west, and for your contribution to the wonderful report that we brought out. Finally, just to say thank you to Claudia. People may not realize it, but 5 minutes before we went live, the person who was the technical host had a Swisscom problem and lost all of their internet, completely gone. So Claudia has been double jobbing between host and moderator. I hear our host actually drove around to Claudia's house, so well done, Olgitza, and took over towards the end. But there were a couple of technical problems, but nothing major, so well done, Claudia. This is a really important issue for EBU, a really important issue for public service media, as it should be. We're ahead, I think, by all parameters of our commercial rivals, and we should acknowledge that, and we should recognize that, but we're not far enough down the road. Some people are much more advanced than others. Some people have done more than others. Some people are more engaged than others. So I think we should recognize the strengths of what we have done, but also say that we do have a ways to go yet. I think at the EBU, it's a journey. This probably wasn't a significant, I think we were late to the journey, if I'm honest. I think it probably wasn't a significant enough issue at EBU. We are now coming there. We're on this journey. You see there what we want to achieve across all of the membership. That's not just at EBU, across all of the membership, across all of Europe, across areas that are very advanced in this and areas that aren't. We believe that it is a core value for public service media. It's something we have to engage in. And what I enjoyed today was, because we all believe that. I think most people involved believe it. It's what are the specifics? What are the guidelines? What are people actually doing? What are the policies? What are the things that make this continue beyond certain individuals believing in it and getting involved in it? And for me, that's the key element, and there was an awful lot of that today, and an awful lot of learnings from today. So, we are committed to this. Obviously, I'm committed to it, but not just me. As an organization, we're committed to it. We have started a journey, and we will keep that journey going. We will continue to work both internally and externally on this area, both on gender and diversity. And I found Aviva's remarks around gender being put into diversity, that debate, which has been going on, is a really interesting one. But both on gender and wider diversity, we are committed to this. We've started a journey. I intend for us to keep moving on this road together, helping people, connecting people. And today was just another step in that regard. So thank you all so much for staying so long, so many of you, and huge attendance today, which I think shows how important the subject is. So thank you all, and thanks again, Claudia, Tinatin, all the contributors and everyone who has joined in. I'm not quite sure if I'm supposed to hand back to you, Claudia, or just wave goodbye and say thank you.
You can do both.
I'll wave goodbye. Tinatin is waving there as well. You can't see her, but I'll hand back to you, Claudia. And
yes.
Tinatin, thank you. You've been fantastic. You've really engaged with this. You've taken grip of it, and you've been a fantastic ambassador throughout the membership. And thank you. So back to you, Claudia. Thank you all.
Thanks a lot, Noel. We have now concluded this marathon webinar. There are still over 100 of you with us. We're really pleased. We have heard from a very wide range of perspectives. We want to thank all of our speakers for their generosity, for being with us and their time. I'd like to thank also my colleagues from the EBU events team for the amazing support in the production of this webinar. So Olgita as the show caller, Natalie for registration, Clotilde for the chat, and also Corinne, and the technical production director, Amir. Thank you, Evelyn, for the help with the slides, and Joe Fahy of Swiss Info for the chat moderation. And thank you all for coming and watching and spending this afternoon with us. We hope the content energized you and inspired you to grow or start your gender equality journeys in your respective organizations. Please continue to follow and join the movement on social media via the hashtag TSM4Equality. Engage, talk to us. And we look forward to seeing you again for the second part of the webinar on September 17th. We will be sending out registration soon. Thank you and goodbye.